Welcome to everyone joining us today on Tech Canada's Deeper Insights webinar series, a webinar held every 2 weeks, supporting leaders and everyone across the country and abroad with timely and relevant topics. Today, we're joined by Lisa Sansom, and we're talking about compassion. Of course, compassion helps us connect with others. It motivates us to help them in times of need. However, we know not only in the last 2 to 3 years, but many years now, we've really required all of us, and especially leaders, to demonstrate more understanding and compassion than ever before, probably without a lot of training on how to deal with it. And ultimately, whether it's helping employees and teams through periods of grief or maintaining wellness over the pandemic, or navigating the rising mental health challenges, a heightened level of compassion is the expectation from employees today. Now, to better understand how to navigate compassion fatigue, we're joined by Lisa Sansom, a positive interventionist who works with leaders and teams and organizational units to help them be more effective and supportive. Not only a keynote speaker, having gone to many conferences, Lisa has run her own business for over 15 years, and her global clients span every industry from private, public, and non-for-profit. Lisa holds a Master of Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and her MBA from the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Her research brings together her experience and expertise in business, education, and positive psychology. Lisa, I'm sure I've missed a lot, so if there's anything that you'd like to add, please do so. Welcome to today's webinar. We're very thrilled to have you, and certainly a topic that's so timely and relevant, and we're really looking forward to diving into that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a very kind and generous introduction. And people, of course, are not here to hear about me. They're here to hear about compassion fatigue and how we express compassion. So I do want to get right into that. I also want to encourage people, please participate in the chat function. Please feel free to put in questions as we go. I have given the wonderful support and production team here permission to interrupt me at any time. So I hope I will get to your questions in a timely manner. And if you have other comments or thoughts, please put those in. There are a couple of times where I will be inviting participation from the audience as well, just asking you about your reflections, your ideas, your insights. Of course, please only put into the chat what it is that you are comfortable sharing. And if you do want to reach out to me afterwards to discuss anything privately, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Just put in my name. I'm the only Lisa Sansom who shows up with a positive psychology background in Canada, as far as I know. So I think I should be pretty easy to find. And if you have any problems, just reach out to the production team. They'll be able to put us in touch. All right, so I have started sharing my screen, and we are going to be talking about healing compassion fatigue. And first of all, I'm curious, here's one of the first places that I'm interested in hearing from you in the chat. What is it that brings you here? What are you interested in learning about or knowing about, or perhaps your own experiences with compassion? We will be talking mostly about compassion in professional settings, in the workplace. And so if you wanted to share in the chat box, what is it that brings you here at this time? I would really appreciate knowing a little bit about who's here. I mean, I can make things up that you are managers or leaders, that you might be running organizations, that you have difficulty expressing compassion, or that your organization doesn't really practice this. But any thoughts that you can share would be great. Oh, there is a Q&A that says chat is disabled. Is it possible that we can make the chat open?
We're just working on doing that right now. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We'll get it right up. Thank you for flagging that.
No problem. And feel free to put things into the Q&A box in the meantime. And so there are a couple of things coming in that I'll just read as I see them coming up. I won't attribute names to them publicly, but somebody asking, why are we feeling so tired? Yes, you would think compassion is a human and natural activity. In fact, it is. And so I am going to talk a little bit more about that and what it is that might cause some of that compassion fatigue and how come something that feels natural can be so exhausting sometimes, especially when we're overwhelmed. Somebody else is here to learn about returning to prior energy levels in helping people help people, which I think is a great way of phrasing that. And someone else is asking, within an organization, how do you support the supporters? What I really like about these questions that are coming in is they do express that care and concern for other people. There's a lot of compassion coming through in these questions about compassion. So we will absolutely get to those. And if there are other thoughts, anything else that you want to share about you, what you are hoping to get out of the webinar, please feel free to throw it into the question and answer or into the chat box once we get that up and running. And again, if there's anything that I don't get to in our time today, oh, chat function is now turned on. Yay. Okay. And if there's anything I don't get to today, please feel free to reach out to me later. So what I'm going to be diving into today on compassion comes largely from the research of two phenomenal researchers, Monica Warline, that's her on the left, and Jane Dutton, that's her on the right with the glasses. And they wrote this fabulous book, which I highly recommend, called Awakening Compassion at Work. What I'm going to be doing today is take you through some of their research-based model on what compassion is, when it works, when it doesn't work, and some things that we can be doing individually, and some other things that we can be doing organizationally and systemically to help bring more compassion into the workplace and to help alleviate compassion fatigue. Now, I do want to emphasize compassion fatigue is real. It does happen, and it does happen for a variety of causes, but there are different reasons why it might happen. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those. And again, feel free to throw questions and comments into the chat box and or into the Q&A as we go. So first of all, what is compassion at work? The model that Monica Warline and Jane Dutton put together has 4 different elements to it. And so I just want to identify and define these terms before we dive into throwing this word compassion around all over the place so that we're on the same page about what compassion means. The first piece of compassion is noticing. Just noticing that suffering is present. Could be in an individual, in a team, in a broader organization. But again, I'm going to be focusing today on a workplace. And so as an individual, the first thing we do is notice that suffering is present. The second piece is that we make meaning of that suffering. We interpret what somebody else is going through in such a way that makes me feel that I would like to be able to alleviate their suffering. I would like to help them heal, to feel better, to smile a little bit, to gain some perspective and see that things really aren't so bad. I make some sort of meaning of the other person's experience, and I want to alleviate that. The third piece is the feeling of empathetic concern. And I feel with that person. You've heard about mirror neurons. I mean, they don't literally exist, but that concept helps us to feel what might be going on in an empathetic, emotional way with somebody else. And so we have that concern. And then the fourth piece of this is that we are moved to action. We take action to alleviate the suffering in some manner, be that by giving somebody time, giving somebody some resources, giving somebody some moral support, arranging things in the context or the environment around them, whatever that might be. These are the 4 different elements of the full cycle of compassion. So what Jane Dutton says is that compassion is an interpersonal process that has benefits for the person who is suffering, the person providing the compassion, and the observers who witness the compassion. So there's a couple of things in there that I would really like us to pull out. One is that it is interpersonal. I am not talking in this particular webinar about self-compassion. Self-compassion is extremely important. Some of you out there might be familiar with self-compassion, the work of Kristen Neff, different types of self-compassion, and it is extremely important. In today's webinar, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the interpersonal process that takes place between two or possibly more individuals. And there are benefits for at least three different parties. The most obvious might be the person who is suffering. The person who is receiving the compassion has some benefits, ideally and hopefully in that their suffering has been alleviated. There are also benefits for the person providing the compassion, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are. But in terms of being able to alleviate somebody else's suffering is beneficial. It does make us feel good. It does help with our own self-worth and how we see ourselves as a contributing member of society. And it forms connections with somebody else in ways that I'll get to in a little bit. And then the third group here is the observers. And that might be even a little less obvious, that if other people witness compassion, they also are elevated. And there are organizational benefits to expressing compassion at work. So let me just throw out a kind of, I don't know, maybe an obvious question out there. Why is it important to show compassion at work? Like, for those of you who are here, feel free to put into the chat box, what do you think is important about showing compassion at work? And why would we even want to do that? I'm imagining a lot of fingers typing away. Okay, thank you for starting us off. I think it's Mocha. Unity, yeah, there's a connection there to make people feel seen and valued. Really important. It's kind of interesting because we think about some workplaces as being really productive focus. Really, it's about the output. It's about what we do, not about the people being seen and valued. So I love that this is taking us to a next kind of level. Something else that came into the Q&A is that it encourages care and belonging. Absolutely. Great for team play, yes, and creates a key foundation for company culture. We're going to talk about culture in a little bit, so that's a really great piece to put in there. And yeah, we are people at work. I think, and I would hope that more and more we're getting organizations today recognizing that we are indeed people. We show up as our whole selves. And as much as a lot of professionals would like to compartmentalize, the reality is the sort of morning that you had at home does come into the workplace with you. And if you are dealing with large issues like family matters, like health concerns, whatever it is, and that does affect how you show up at work. And compartmentalizing and doing that emotional labor of faking it can be detrimental over the long run. So yes, we are people first and employees second, and we want to recognize that in compassionate ways. Now, the research has some really interesting things to say here about compassionate organizations. And when there is more compassion in the workplace, when an organizational culture is assessed as being more compassionate, and people feel that they can demonstrate compassion at work, there are bottom line advantages. In for-profit organizations, they actually perform better over the long run because of that culture. There are also strategic advantages, and you can imagine that there's a lot going on here with the people, their commitment to the organization, their ability to feel cared for and to feel safe is going to translate into more creativity and innovation. And when people feel safe to take risks, there's going to be more learning. This translates into a higher service quality. In a lot of service oriented organizations, there's this notion in the good ones of look after our employees and they will look after our customers. And that turns out to be extremely valid in compassionate organizations. When you've got that bonding happening between people, there is better collaboration that's occurring on teams and across teams, fewer silos when you've got those connections happening across teams. And this greater corporate culture turns into better talent attraction, better talent retention. We often think that people will leave if somewhere else pays them more. But more and more, we're seeing employees these days looking for great places to work, be that in the work environment, the work context, work flexibility, and also psychological safety and well-being. And compassion factors into that quite strongly. Compassionate organizations have higher employee engagement, greater adaptability because people feel safe. And there's many other research outcomes. One that just boggled my mind is that when someone feels that other people care about them and express compassion, they heal physically and psychologically faster and more thoroughly. Compassion also allows people to tap into positive emotions, and positive emotions have a number of great impacts on creativity and psychological safety and connecting with other people. Compassion reduces anxiety. It increases attachment and commitment to the organizations. And as other people have already mentioned, it communicates the dignity and the worth for one person to another, and it helps people to feel valued. It helps them feel like they belong and that they matter. They are worthy and capable, and therefore they see the organization as more caring. This all builds trust and it builds stronger bonds, and it has those collective benefits like higher collaboration levels, lower turnover, higher collective commitment to the organization and to each other. So hopefully at this point, we're all aligned. Compassion is a good thing to have in an organization. And that means that we do need to bring that feeling and seeing other people as people into the organization. So let me go through those 4 different elements in Warline's and Dutton's model of compassion and do a little bit of a deep dive into each one of those and how this shows up in an organization and how this shows up for individuals. And there are a few points where I'm going to be asking you, what's your experience with this? And what's your thinking on this? And how might we make this better in our organizations? All right, so the first piece is noticing. This is what they call the portal to awakening compassion. And noticing suffering at work is harder than we expect it's going to be, especially in today's hybrid and remote environment, where quite often we're only meeting with other employees for scheduled meetings. We don't have the opportunity to see somebody waiting at the microwave or bump into somebody at the bathroom or happen to stand in line for coffee with somebody else. It's much harder to notice that suffering at work. And when suffering goes unnoticed, compassion fails. We just don't see it. So we aren't compassionate. There's just a piece missing there. And in the workplace, most workplaces are not felt to be safe for the expression of suffering. There can be a lot of fear, a lot of shame, a lot of uncertainty. People just feel like I should be stoic here. I should just hold it together, and I should not let anybody know what's going on with me or my suffering or my life or how I'm struggling at work, or that I have a mental health illness, or that my parents are very ill, or that my cat is dying, or whatever it is. When we can express that suffering, even in small, maybe nonverbal ways, sometimes people will notice that suffering by drawing on a similar experience from their own past. And this is where things like employee resource groups can be really helpful. An employee resource group, for example, for parents of young children or people who are going through divorce, helps to bring people together with similar experiences and create those compassionate environments. So noticing becomes more likely and more skilled as we learn to discern people's patterns of energy and engagement. And that means I see them more often, I talk to them more often, I work with them more often, and I'm able to notice, for example, just to call on Brittany because she's here, just to say, Brittany, seems like you're not as energetic today. You're not your usual up and buoyant and positive self. Is everything okay? And I can ask those humble and gentle questions about what somebody else is going through because I notice things might not be quite on for that person. So there's a lot that gets in the way of noticing. Organizations also, even if we were all in the same office, even if we were all, in the 1980s or whatever, and we were just driving it in, organizations still shape our attention. Time pressure, work overload, performance demands distract us. And we get very focused on what I need to do here and what I need to do to make my boss happy, to make their bosses happy. That distracts us from tapping in and noticing what's going on with other people around us. And there can be explicit policies and rules and norms and codes of conduct that can orient us towards punishment rather than curiosity. And when somebody is struggling and they don't perform, they might end up getting put, for example, on a performance improvement plan rather than getting support and resources that they need. So I'm curious, and I would love to see some ideas come into the chat at this point. What are some things that you think we could do instead? Instead of the time pressure, instead of the performance demands, instead of the policies and rules that are punishment oriented, how might we be able to shape our organizations towards compassion? And perhaps some of you have examples of places where this has been done, or it's something that you have been able to do yourself. All right, there's a question from LinkedIn. Do you have references for those great benefit findings? In fact, I do. There is a great article which I will be able to dig up, and I will send that through to the production team. I can't access it right now because it's going to throw my entire computer system off. But if you go to the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship at the University of Michigan, Jane Dutton's work on compassion at work is there. And there's an article, I can't recall the year of it right now, but it does have all of those highlighted findings in it. All right, so some things that are coming in terms of how we can shape our organizations towards compassion. Team chats, yeah, team chats weekly on Mondays. That's great. And when we forge opportunities for people to connect with each other on that personal level, not just about how's the project going and how's our dashboard looking, and we need to talk about the red stoplight things, forming those actual times to allow people to get to know each other opens up opportunities for noticing. One-on-one meetings are great. Again, quite often, and Nick, let me know if this is what you're thinking about, those one-on-one meetings are between a manager and one of their direct reports. And it's very easy for managers to say, okay, here's your to-do list. How's the to-do list? But occasionally to take time to look that employee in the eye and say, and how are you doing? What's going on with you? Now, not everybody, of course, is going to feel like they want to share what's going on, but at least it allows that manager an opportunity to assess how is the energy of this person usually? How are their dynamics usually? And when something is not going well, that allows the manager to do that humble inquiry work and to gently support and offer other resources in the organization. Yeah. Any other thoughts on how we can shape our organizations towards compassion? Random check-ins. Yeah, those are great. So again, what I'm hearing here as a theme is we need to talk to people. This isn't just about emails. This isn't just about Slack messages. This isn't about Teams chats. is we really need to talk to people. And sometimes we're going to need to fight a little bit against those time pressures and overload and performance demands and force ourselves to pick our heads up and say, okay, part of my job, especially as a manager and as a leader, is to walk around and to see how people are doing and to take that time to check in with them. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can do that, but let me move on to the second part of this model, which is interpreting. So interpreting is making meaning of what we see going on with somebody else. And it's the key to responding with compassion. So sometimes we see somebody suffering and we might interpret their suffering in a way that shuts down compassion. So for example, if somebody just blew a proposal, they put it together and it was messy and the presentation did not go well and it was not well thought out and the numbers just didn't add up, we might assign blame. And we might say, yeah, they screwed up, but you know what? If they had put more time and effort into it, they would have done better. If they had just reached out to the right resources, they would have done better. They have caused their own suffering. If I believe that to be true, I'm not going to express compassion towards the other person. I might also feel that somebody else doesn't deserve my compassion. They didn't treat me well. They're not a nice person. They're a loner. They're in a job that I don't particularly attach value to. They're on another team and I don't like the leader of that team. Whatever it is, I might feel that someone else is not deserving of my compassion. And if I believe that to be true, I'm not going to express compassion. And then there might also be me. I might be feeling like I cannot handle this. And managers that I talk with, because I do a lot of leadership coaching, managers that I talk with, they're afraid to ask their employees how things are going because the manager themselves has a lot going on. And if I get drawn into an hour-long conversation with some teary, weepy-eyed employee who's going to go through my box of Kleenex, and I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know if I have the time. I don't know if I have the skills. I don't know if I have the capacity. So I don't want to ask. And then that's going to get in the way of responding with compassion. Now, all of these are real. All of these happen very quickly. And there might be good reasons for some of these. It will, however, get in the way of compassion. So what can we do instead? If you catch yourself thinking in some of these ways, there are more generous interpretations that we can make. So one is to withhold blame and shift to curiosity. As the saying goes, instead of being certain, be curious. That person who really messed up on that proposal, maybe usually they're pretty good at this. And what is going on with them in this particular environment that they were not able to deliver on this one? There is some suffering going on there. Whether it's specific to that presentation or something contextual around it, we don't know, but there might be something else going on there. Maybe I could ask about it. We do want to see other people as worthy and deserving of compassion. That other team, for example, where I don't like that boss and there's someone on that team who's suffering, well, maybe I could still help them. They are a person, they are a member of this organization, they are a valued partner to me. Maybe I could go and offer something to them. And as a participant here noted, compassion is very natural and it is very normal. And even very young children have that urge to express compassion from a very, very young age when they see somebody else suffering. So I do believe we all have the capacity to meet suffering with compassion anytime that it arises. And sometimes this can be done even in very, very small moments, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So remember, we all belong to one workplace. We are one human family that can help create the commonality that helps you to interpret the suffering in a way that you want to express compassion. When you see challenges happening, like poor performance or broken trust or disrespect or other uncivil behaviors, these may be calling for compassion rather than for punishment or disdain. Sometimes there are people who we think are rude in the workplace. They may be curt or surly. Maybe there is something else going on with them that they're trying to be protective and they're trying to compartmentalize, and it's just not working very well for them. So those challenges could indicate a level of suffering happening there. Now, fierce compassion involves refusing to perpetuate suffering in work situations. And when we don't express suffering, when we don't express compassion to other people, we may actually be prolonging suffering. So sometimes we need to be fiercely compassionate and go against some workplace norms or what we feel are workplace norms and express compassion for other people anyways. So these generous interpretations of suffering help to keep us from acting out of vengeance. They help us to stop from punishing others, especially when suffering erupts in inappropriate ways at work. So any thoughts on how we can make it easier to be more generous in our interpretations of suffering at work? If there's anything that anybody has done or tried, something that maybe you have done to change your own mindset to interpret that I would like to offer compassion to this person, I would love to see that in the chat box. Certainly when I talk with my clients, my leadership coaching clients, a lot of them talk about I just need to do this. I just need to see people differently. And sometimes they think about people that they haven't really reached out to or really connected with. They make time to do that. Yeah, step outside of my me world. One of the things that I remember from my high school experiences, I don't know how everybody else's high school was. Mine was a little bit rocky at times. But I found that when I was going through a particularly difficult time as a teenager, one of the best things that got me out of my me world was to help somebody else and to go and find somebody else who was suffering and help them resolve whatever it was that was going on for them. And there's an example where I would like to think that somebody else benefited. I mean, I'm still friends with a lot of these people, but also it was beneficial for me because it did help me to step out of my me world and to connect with other people and help me to gain perspective as well. All right. If other ideas come into the chat box, we'll highlight those. But in the meantime, and in the interest of time, I'd like to go on and talk about feeling. Oh, something just came into the chat, so let me check. We need to actually know our employees better outside of work. That is definitely one way forward. And again, some employees are not comfortable with that, and that is perfectly fine, even if we know them within work. Things like, what is it that energizes them about the work that they do? What is it that they bring as their strengths and most valuable skills? What are they interested in for a career path? What are some stretch assignments that they might want to get involved in or new projects that they see that they're really excited about? That helps us to form a fuller picture of this person rather than just somebody who's pushing buttons on a machine, like somebody said. We can get to know them within the work environment in a way that does help us to express that compassion. Perspective definitely helps. Yeah, reflecting on someone's overall contributions helps to navigate those short-term frustrations. And in the short term, sometimes it can be frustrating to deal with someone who's having difficulties or challenges or is suffering. But remembering when they have contributed and sitting down and reminding them of when they have contributed as well can be really helpful. So, Sue, this is really important, and we are absolutely going to get to this. We need to learn how to recover from being completely spent already. Am I asking you to do more? I would say I'm asking you to do differently. So if it's okay, we're going to pause that one, and I will get to that in the next little bit of the presentation, because I think you've put your finger right on it. And I don't want to be putting more on the shoulders of individual managers. There are going to be some different things, absolutely. And then there are going to be some systemic things. And again, happy to talk about any of this further. Okay, great. Okay, feeling. So this is the third part of the compassionate work model. Empathy is feeling with, and as I've mentioned, this is core to our human nature. And this can be evoked even by very small facial expressions or verbal cues. We're very attuned to those micro expressions, for example, or the pauses between somebody's word. And again, this can be very difficult to access at work. Now, there was this fascinating research study that was done by a group of researchers. It's called the Good Samaritan Research. And for those of you who are not familiar with the biblical story of the Good Samaritan, essentially it goes something like this, where a rich man was beset upon by thieves, and he was beaten and mugged, and his valuables were stolen from him, and his robes were ripped from him, and he was left alone and beat up in the ditch. And there were passerby that went by him and did not help him at all. They did not get down into the ditch and see if he was okay. And the Samaritan, who at that time was part of a disliked tribe, it was a Samaritan who stopped and tended to him and to his wounds and said, "Are you okay?" and helped to alleviate his suffering. Now, there is other work that is done on the biblical, religious, theological side about what this means. But here's what the researchers did with this particular parable, is they took Christian ministers, I believe, and they asked them to write a sermon based on the Good Samaritan parable. And they had them in one room in a university environment. And after they had written their sermon, the researchers told the ministers and said, "Okay, you need to deliver this in a building on the other side of university campus." And for some of the research participants, they didn't all know that they were in a research study, but off we go. For some of the participants, they said, "You have lots of time to get there. It's a 5-minute walk and you have half an hour. So take your time, get over there and set up when you get there, and you will deliver your sermon on the Good Samaritan." For some of the participants, they said, "You've got about 10 minutes to get there. So really, you got a little bit of time, but you probably need to hurry and focus on getting there so you can start on time." And then for some of the participants, they said, "It's 5-minute walk away. You're expected there in 5 minutes. Go." And what would happen is when they stepped out of the building, lo and behold, there is somebody in the middle of the path who is lying there, obviously hurt, obviously suffering. And then the question becomes, what is it that these people did who had just written a sermon on the Good Samaritan? And what the research found is that those who were told, "You have lots of time," were more likely to stop and help the person who was in the middle of the path suffering. Now, the person who was in the middle of the path, you can imagine, you've heard about psychology studies before, was a Confederate. They were not really hurt. They were not really suffering. They were a plant to see what it is that this individual would do. But there's a pretty strong correlation. People who had more time and were told it's okay to take it easy were much more likely to stop and help the person who was suffering. People who were told it's a 5-minute walk and you have only 5 minutes to get there literally stepped over this person to be able to get to where they needed to be to deliver their sermon on the Good Samaritan. So think about what's going on in your workplace environment. Think about the time pressures. Think about the performance demands. All of that takes us away from feeling, from noticing, from meaning making. And so it is going to be very, very difficult in those high pressure environments to express compassion because we may not be noticing it and we may not be connecting with other people. So yes, there are some systemic things that we need to push back on. We need to make sure that we are well looked after, which we'll get to. We need to make sure that our teams are well looked after. We need to make sure that workloads are manageable, and recognizing that connecting with other people, being attuned, listening empathetically, paying mindful attention, all of that to set the stage for compassion is part of our jobs. And if we are not doing that, we're not setting the stage for compassion for ourselves and for other people. So the last phase of compassionate work is acting. And that is we take some sort of action to alleviate the suffering. We have noticed it, we have interpreted it, we feel in a way that makes us want to move to action. And action is going to be very different depending on you, the individual, the nature of the suffering, and the context that you're operating in. So then what happens when we get compassion fatigue? When fatigue sets in, there's probably one of a few things going on here. And that is that the natural expression or cycle of compassion has possibly been repeated, blocked, or suppressed. There's been some studies with nurses who experience compassion fatigue, and we often think about this in the healthcare environment. And when nurses are encouraged to express compassion, the level of compassion fatigue goes down. When nurses feel that they must be professional and they have to remain distant and they're not allowed to express that sort of compassion, and it's, we got to get this IV in and we've got to do these blood tests, and they're very task focused and very time focused, they don't express compassion. But when they are reminded and encouraged that compassion is part of their job, levels of compassion fatigue go down. Now, sometimes suffering is noticed, but we might feel that we cannot or should not express some sort of action. We might feel like, oh, that's not done around here, or that's not this culture of performance, or I don't see other people expressing compassion, so I'm not going to do that because I don't feel that that is allowed. And that level of emotional labor where you feel the urge to act but cannot act, and so you need to hide and suppress that, that is going to be very difficult, and that's going to make that compassion fatigue and fatigue generally much more likely. And then it could also be that we're in an environment where there is too much. Now, I have too much in quotes here because that level is different for everybody. I don't want to imply that there is, if you get to 67 on the compassion, whatever it is, it's going to be different for everybody and in different environments. And so individuals might feel overwhelmed, and they might feel unresilient and unresourceful. And that can lead to your own moral distress, perhaps some sort of secondary trauma, depending on the environment that you're in, and more dysfunction. And those feelings of inadequacy can further lead to your own suffering, creating downward spirals. Again, someone asking for the references, I will send those along. I think most of these are in that one article, so we'll make sure that we have that for sure. Okay, so what are some of the things then that we can do individually? So let me talk individually first, and then I'm going to talk organizationally and systemically in order to alleviate our own compassion fatigue. Well, the first thing is we might express compassion anyways, because it helps us to feel better to express compassion. And so even if it seems like nobody else is doing it, we might just go and, email that person who looks like they're suffering, or go and knock on their office door and say, hey, do you have a couple of minutes? I notice that you haven't really been yourself lately. And you just kind of close the door and you express that compassion quietly, and you don't make a big deal of it. That is something that some people do. It's a little bit of an act of, I'm going to say, moral rebellion, and it is worth thinking about. How do I express compassion for somebody else? In terms of our own well-being, making sure that you are looking after your basics. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough rest? Are you getting enough renewal? And those three things are all slightly different. Sleep, of course, we know what sleep is. Rest is that restorative rest that might happen even during waking hours. It could involve, something that you find calm and peaceful. And renewal is something that can help you get your energy back. And that could be engaging in hobbies or engaging in flow activities, working on a project at work that you especially value and enjoy. You want to make sure that you are looking after your own energy levels in really important and deliberate ways. Also, if you are feeling some compassion fatigue, reach out for support. Hopefully, you've got access to support at work, like professional EAP or EFAP programs, counselors, and so on. If you need help, especially as a manager, it is a great idea to model accessing those resources because that is something that your employees will want to access as well. And if you're able to share, yes, I called that 1-800 number and we had 3 great sessions and it was amazing, really helped me through a tough time in my life. Employees are more likely to do that as well. There's also some lots of great research around the benefits of exercise and getting out into nature, just in terms of helping us stabilize our psychological and mental and emotional well-being. And even if you can just get out into nature for a few minutes each day, go and hug a tree, go and appreciate a sunset, whatever it is, that also calms and stabilizes our levels. Trusted relationships, such as friends and family, sometimes they are a little more distant and they can express compassion towards us. They can also support us. They can also help you problem solve if that is what you are looking for. But remember, you are not alone in this. Now, sometimes our brains will play tricks on us. They will take us into some pretty dark places sometimes and make us think and feel that we are alone. And that notion of shame, I can't possibly express to somebody else how I'm feeling, is a real trickster. And when you start to feel like I am alone in this, that is exactly when you want to reach out to friends, family, and professional relationships that can support you. I do want to acknowledge sometimes we need distance from the situation. Sometimes there might be suffering at work that we are truly not equipped for. And I want to emphasize here for managers and leaders, you do not need to be the sole provider of compassion for everybody. You absolutely can refer them on to other resources and take a little bit of distance yourself and just say to somebody, look, I understand that you're going through a lot right now. Here are the best resources for you right now. Let's touch base again in a couple of weeks. We're still going to keep our project meetings, still need to talk about work. But in terms of the suffering that you're going through in another way, let's make sure that you are well supported. As a manager or a leader, you may not be the best person to provide that right now. And then ultimately, make sure you are taking your vacation time, get away, disconnect. There's a whole bunch of other things in here around setting boundaries. Don't be checking your work email at 10 o'clock at night. You do have a right to disconnect. And looking into short-term or long-term leave possibilities if the fatigue does turn into burnout. So those are some of the individual pieces in there. Let's talk about organizational hints of compassion in the culture. And again, this comes out of Jane Dutton's research. I will make sure that those resources are shared. But what we know is that organizational routines matter. Are organizations putting into place routines that allow for connection and allow for the expression of compassion? And these are things that start from the top. You'll see the last bullet point on here is that leadership role models matter. And so if we can share this information with leaders and people who create organizational routines, that can be really helpful. So little things like check-ins at the beginning of meetings, as some of you have mentioned, putting in time for one-on-ones, making sure that people get opportunities to connect with each other, that there are shared and common lunch spaces, for example, where people can sit and talk to each other, that people are encouraged to get out of their offices at lunch and go out for a walk with other people. These routines really matter. Shared values matter. Now, I'm keenly aware a lot of organizations have value statements that are sitting collecting dust on walls, and they don't really mean anything at all. So what opportunities are there to bring these values out, especially the ones that speak to compassion, the ones that speak to cultures where people matter? Do you, for example, put them on your meeting agendas? Are they shared with stakeholders? Are they spoken about in annual reports in ways that matter? Are they measured and are they observed? And have they made your workplace into a place that people want to work? Those shared values absolutely matter. Now, another area of Jane Dutton's research, some of you may be familiar with, is high quality connections. I'm not going to go into that very deeply. Again, I can share that with anybody who's interested in it. And if you take a look at Jane Dutton's website, she'll have a lot of information on there. But essentially, high quality connections are small, in the moment connections of mattering between people. You don't have to know the other person well. You don't even have to have a lot of time. You can have a high quality connection with the person who is scanning your groceries in the grocery store this weekend. It's just a moment of focus on each other as though that other person matters. And just to have a little, how are you doing? How are you feeling? It's been the end of a busy day. I care. You are a person. I see you. The relationship that we have right now in this 30 seconds is important, and the task that you are doing is important, and that is a high quality connection. So when those are built into an organizational fabric, that is also helpful. If you have senior leaders who walk down the hallway and they're not making any eye contact with anybody, that sends a certain vibe. If you have high profile leaders who take time to recognize and acknowledge other people, even if it's just eye contact and a smile, that changes the culture, and that is a high quality connection. Now, in some organizations, they also have legitimate, compassionate roles. There are counselors, there are support people, there are coaches embedded into the organization. And that sends a very visible notification that compassion matters in this organization. And as I did mention, leadership roles matter as well. So, yes, a really big, long comment just came in. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So, because we are almost done and we're almost out of time, and I want to try and harmonize these together. So the first thing to think about is, as a leader, how can you model compassion? My guess is a lot of you already are. You may not have recognized it until we went through this. You may not have been able to put an actual name on it or practices to it. But now my hope is that you can see you are doing small things every day to lead with compassion. And there are things that you're already doing as a leader that maybe you can build compassion more explicitly into. Like, how do you start a meeting? Do you start it with a round of what went well? Or how are you feeling today? Or what song most exemplifies how you are doing right now? There are fun ways of doing this, but there are very small things, free, easy to do, insert them into what you're doing anyways. Take a look at the emails that you're writing. Are these emails that radiate compassion, or are these emails, and sometimes they will need to be emails that get right to the point really quickly, but sometimes those emails can come across as a little harsh, and it's worth looking at the emails that you've sent over the past week. Are they mostly on the compassionate side, or are they mostly on, let's just get right down to business? I don't care about you as a human being. I'm being a little extreme. But take a look at, how are you communicating? How do you show up? What are you doing even in those very small moments? All right, so at this point, I would love to, I'm going to go back into the chat and digest that long comment that came on. I'm going to go back into the Q&A and see if there's anything else that I was missing. And I invite the production team, Katrinelle, or whoever, to come back and let me know if there's anything that I am missing.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for all of your questions, comments, interactions. Thank you. What a timely, relevant, important topic for all of us personally and organizationally. I don't see any questions. So if you wanted to get to the comment, I believe, from Sue here in the
Yeah.
chat. In the meantime, I'm gonna mute myself. We're going to check LinkedIn. Of course, we've got lots of active participants on there, so we'll make sure that we get any questions or comments that come through there as well.
Great. All right. So Sue, let me get to your comment. And so I'm really appreciating everything that you're putting into the chat here. So 300,000 years ago, in physical danger, if resources are scarce, individuals only survived if they took care of themselves first. So I'm going to say a maybe. And one of the things that we know to be true about, or that we believe to be true about human beings when we take a look at evolutionary psychology, is that we are hardwired to be in community. Some researchers like Jonathan Haidt call us hive creatures. And really, individually, we're quite weak. We don't have like scales like alligators and armadillos. We don't have big claws and sharp teeth like grizzly bears. We're pretty easy to be taken down individually. And so to be banished from a tribe would be death. The best way that we had for survival was to be in community with other people. Now, this is a personal thought. This is not justified by any research that I know of, but I do believe that one of the reasons that it's very hard for human beings to ask explicitly for help and to say, I am suffering, can you help me? Is because previously we would have lived in natural community with other people. We would have lived in huts that were around a common campfire. We would have traveled in nomadic ways with the same people. We would have been acquainted with the same families over long periods of time. And we would have seen if somebody was suffering. Nobody would need to ask. We would know these people very well. We would have spent most of our waking hours with them. And if somebody was unwell, we would just be able to notice that, and we would just be able to express compassion. And so I do believe this is one of the things that we are missing. And that's a hugely systemic issue in our modern day, in our society. I mean, you just think about how we live in isolated houses and apartments spread far apart from each other. And we're not really encouraged to spend lots of time with other people. I mean, I can go about my entire day and I can go to a bank machine and not talk to anybody. I can go to the grocery store and do self-checkout. I can pump my own gas. I don't have to talk to anybody if I don't want to. And there's some pros to that. It really fuels our need for autonomy and independence. But the downside is we don't form those connections. And without those connections, we don't notice. And without noticing, we don't get the opportunity to express compassion. So I agree with you. I think there is a bigger community piece here that is missing. And that is something that I would encourage us, if we want more compassion in the workplace, we may want to think about, how do we design workplaces for more connection with other people? I am talking really big systemic pieces here. It's not something that one person is going to be able to do. But I think one opportunity that's come out of the pandemic is that we're more aware of suffering. We're more aware of people as people. And I hope that this is something that will continue on into the future. And that gives us the opportunity to craft workplaces in more humane ways. Yeah. So again, just continuing with Sue's comment here, how we perceive the same events differently could mean we're at risk of disconnection or reason to network and bond. If we experience it as overwhelmed, it's the meaning we make. Absolutely. And so in Monica Warline and Jane Dutton's model, that meaning and that interpretation becomes critical. Is this about us? Is this about the other person? Is this about poor me? And I think you're also tapping into that whole notion of self-efficacy. So Sue, I would love to connect with you more on this if you're open for that. Thank you for your valuable chat comments.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. We had participants stay all the way to the end. We're at the top of the hour. Very much appreciate all of your insights, all of the resources and the recommendations, both again for the individual and the organization. And I know a lot of people within their work have access to resources that perhaps they've never taken advantage of before. And this is that time to really look into them and see how they can help them. Of course, this webinar is being recorded. It will be up on the Tech Canada website. We'll do our very best to put it up as quickly as possible. And of course, for anyone receiving our newsletters, we'll be able to send it out next week. And Lisa, I think some of the resources, perhaps you can connect us with those, and we'll be sure to put them on the webinar page to give everyone as much background information as possible. Again, thank you for the participation. Thank you for the comments, the questions. Such an important topic. And Lisa, thank you again to you. Such a wonderful opportunity to have you on today's Deeper Insights webinar.
Thank you so much. This was great. Anybody, if I did not get to your question, please reach out. I will absolutely get back to you and we'll discuss further. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the week. Bye, Lisa. Bye, everyone.